It started with, "Hi, I'm looking for work." She looked barely 18, trembling, desperate. But when I asked her name, everything froze. Her mother's name, that name, was the one I spent 16 years trying to bury. And just like that, my past walked through the door wearing my son's secret like a second skin. I thought I was hiring a kid. Turns out, I was reopening the wound I was told had healed. But why was my son protecting her? And what was she protecting him from? It was just past 8, and the shop was breathing in its usual quiet. I had cracked open the front door like I always did to let in the crisp morning air. The sunlight filtered in through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the floorboards and turning the faint dust into something that looked almost poetic. The scent of cinnamon tea lingered in the air, mixed with the musty smell of old paper, comforting, familiar. I sat behind the counter at The Turning Page, our little bookstore tucked near the park on T Street. Sacramento was easing into late autumn, and the trees out front had turned copper and gold. Most mornings, like this one, passed without much to talk about. A few regulars. A newspaper folded just so. A second cup of tea I didn't finish. There was a "Help Wanted" sign taped to the window that had been there so long it had become part of the decor. I told myself I left it up just in case, but the truth? I didn't trust people. Not after what happened. Silence isn't just quiet. Silence is revealing. You sit in it too long, and it starts to talk back. I reached out and adjusted the deep plum scarf that always hung near the register. I hadn't worn it in years, but I couldn't bring myself to move it. It reminded me of something I wasn't ready to forget. Or maybe someone. Then came the knock, soft, barely there. But it was enough to break the spell. She stood at the door, thin and small, with wild curls and a look in her eyes that told me she hadn't slept in a bed recently. Her backpack looked like it had been through a war, and her coat was too thin for the morning chill. I opened the door, and she stepped in like she wasn't sure if she belonged here. "You looking for something, sweetheart?" I asked. Her voice was scratchy, uncertain. "Are you hiring?" She was maybe 16, maybe 17. I couldn't tell. But those eyes had seen things most grown women hadn't. My guard went up, but not in the usual way. It was something else. A pull. "Sit down. You want some tea?" I offered. "Honey, you look like you haven't eaten since Tuesday." She nodded, sat at the little table near the window, and I poured her a cup like I had done 1,000 times before. But nothing about this felt routine. "What's your name?" "Keziah." That name sat strange in my mouth. "You from around here?" "Sort of. Been bouncing around." I kept the questions light. "I've learned people talk more when they're not being interrogated." She mentioned she was staying at a shelter, had left home a while back. I didn't press. Then came the moment. She stirred her tea and said, "My mom used to have a bookstore too, kind of like this. Her name's Lenora Caldwell." My hand froze in the air. That name. 16 years gone and still sharp as glass. I kept my face steady, decades of practice. "Sorry, what was your mom's name again?" I asked, as if I'd just missed it in passing. She repeated it. "Lenora Caldwell." I nodded slowly and turned back toward the counter, heart hammering behind my ribs. Every part of me wanted to bolt for the back room, but I stayed still. I'd spent years burying that name, rewriting it in my memory as someone else's problem. But now it was here, wearing worn shoes and asking for a job. "Keziah, come help me check something in the storage room," I said, needing to move, to breathe. She followed without question. As we walked past the counter, my hand grazed the plum scarf again. Same scarf I was wearing the day everything fell apart. The day my son disappeared. The storage room smelled like cardboard and damp pages. I flipped on the light, pretending to look for something. In my head, I was somewhere else entirely. I saw him again, my boy, laughing in the back of the store, small hands gripping the counter, asking me to read his favorite pirate book just one more time. And then, silence. Sometimes, ghosts don't haunt you. They just find a new body to wear. I looked at Keziah. There was something, some shadow in her face, that tugged at memories I'd locked away. I didn't know if it was her voice, the way she folded her hands, or just fate deciding to be cruel. She broke the silence. "Do you have any sons?" "You remind me of someone my mom used to talk about." I stopped breathing. Everything inside me recoiled, but I didn't show it. I just looked at her. Closely, like seeing her for the first time. And there it was. A trace. Not in the eyes, not in the nose. It was the way she waited, like she expected disappointment. My voice barely made it out. No, I lied. And in that moment, I realized fate doesn't knock, it walks right in. I didn't sleep that night. The ceiling above my bed turned into a screen where memories replayed like scenes from a movie I never agreed to watch. I lay still, listening to the old radiator click in its rhythm, each sound dragging me deeper into the past I tried to bury. Lenora Caldwell. 16 years. I hadn't said that name out loud in 16 years. Not since the court hearings, not since the headlines twisted the truth and spit it back at me, not since my son vanished like smoke. The odds it was the same woman, they felt impossible. But what are the odds a girl with tired eyes and a haunted smile just happens to walk into my store, needing help, and drops that name like it means nothing? I tried to write it off as coincidence. My mind went logical, same name, different woman. Happens all the time. But my gut, that ancient part of us that remembers things the brain wants to forget, it wouldn't shut up. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my old photos. There was one I hadn't opened in years. Labeled, junior year, before everything broke. My son, smiling, arms slung around his friends like the world belonged to him. I stared at that photo longer than I'd like to admit. And I remembered the courtroom. Her smirk, my ex's silence. The lies that didn't even need to be clever, they were loud enough to drown the truth. By morning, I was up before the sun. I walked downstairs into the bookstore, trying to keep my breath even. Keziah was already there, dusting shelves. Like she belonged. We greeted each other like nothing had shifted overnight. She was humming something, a tune I hadn't heard in years. A song my son used to play on that old boombox, back when our house still had music in it. "You eaten yet?" I asked, more mother than employer in that moment. She shook her head. I made her a sandwich. We sat across from each other, silence padding the space between us. I kept my tone light. "Your mom, is she still around?" There was a beat too long before she answered. "Not really. We don't talk much. She's hard to love." Her words dropped like stones in a quiet lake. Ripples I couldn't control followed. Later, while she shelved books in the back room, I walked behind the counter. Her backpack was sitting there, half-zipped. I told myself I was just being cautious. But the truth? I needed to know. Inside a side pocket, I found it. A torn envelope. The name was clear. Lenora Caldwell. Sacramento address. Handwritten. My fingers trembled. I clutched the edge of the counter, my breath caught between past and present. My hand reached out, almost unconsciously, for the plum scarf on the hook. "She sent her daughter right to my door," I whispered. What was this? Some twisted full-circle setup? Or had karma finally run out of places to hide? I moved through the store like a ghost and unlocked the old storage box where we kept lost things. Most of it was junk. But some pieces, some things didn't belong to strangers. Inside, I found it. The notebook. Worn edges. Familiar scribble. My son's handwriting. I sat on the floor. No strength to stand anymore. I flipped through pages, old lists, sketches, and then I saw it. A note. Folded into the lining of a scarf, that scarf. The one I hung by the counter, year after year, like a relic. "If anyone ever finds this." I didn't leave because I wanted to. Just one sentence. And it cracked me open. Was this his voice, reaching out from a place I couldn't find? Had Lenora taken more than my trust? More than the years? Had she stolen him? I didn't hear Keziah come back. When I looked up, she was standing in the doorway, eyes wide. "You okay?" she asked. I held the note in my hand like it was made of glass. I stood slowly, walked toward her. "Tell me something, Keziah," I said, my voice low but steady. "What did your mom say about the boy she used to know?" "Because I think that boy was mine. Because I think that boy was mine." The words hung there like smoke, visible, choking, but impossible to hold. Keziah didn't say anything at first. She blinked, as if trying to process something too big for her small frame to carry. Then she looked down, her voice low. "I don't know. My mom, she never talked about the past. Just once, she said there was a mistake. A bad one. Something that ruined everything." Outside, rain began hammering the windows. It was the kind that soaked deep into the bones of things. I tightened my grip on the counter to keep my hands from shaking. "Come sit," I said, gesturing to the old table in the corner where I took my lunch. "Just talk with me for a bit." I didn't want to scare her, but I needed to know what she knew, and what she didn't. As she sat across from me, I studied her again. That tired look. The eyes too old for her age. She fidgeted with her sleeves, not out of guilt, more like confusion. My stomach twisted. I had spent so many years convincing myself that I was wrong. That maybe I'd overreacted. That maybe my son had just run away. But the knot in my chest said otherwise. Later, while she was rearranging old books on a back shelf, I started cleaning too, half out of habit, half out of instinct. That's when I saw it. An old photo slipped from the pages of a travel book. I picked it up and froze. It was her, Lenora, standing in a sunlit park, her arms around a boy whose face was blurred, the edges torn. But I knew that smile. I knew the slope of that shoulder. I knew that park. My knees went weak. On the back, in faded ink, "My Sunshine, 2009. I remembered that year. The exact week my son vanished was the last time I stood in that same park, begging strangers for any sign of him. I turned the photo in my hands. "Where did your mom used to live?" I asked when Keziah returned. She answered without thinking, "Citrus Glen, near the old freeway exit." Of course she did. That was where the trail had gone cold. 16 years of silence, and now this. I spent all these years trying to believe it was just bad luck, I whispered to myself. Maybe I didn't imagine anything at all. I couldn't stay in the shop any longer. I needed air, a change of scenery. I told Keziah we'd grab a warm meal on me. The diner was quiet that afternoon. The kind of place where old booths held older secrets. I ordered her soup and a sandwich. Something simple. She thanked me like I'd just saved her life. And then, while staring into her cup, she said it. "My mom once mentioned a woman. Said she wouldn't let go of her son. That she had to fix it, her own way." I don't know if Keziah saw my hand flinch, but I felt it like a blow to the chest. The puzzle pieces were sliding into place, one sharp edge at a time. "I need to use the restroom," I muttered, standing too fast. Inside, I gripped the edge of the sink and leaned forward. My reflection looked like someone I didn't recognize. Pale, hollow, but beneath it fire. "You didn't lose him," I said to myself. "She stole him." I splashed water on my face, let it drip down, and stared again. The grief didn't vanish, but something else took its place. Something colder, sharper, focus. When I returned to the table, Keziah looked up nervously. "Did I do something wrong?" "No, honey." My voice was steady now. "You just brought something lost back home." She didn't understand, not fully, but her shoulders relaxed a little. As we finished up, she accidentally knocked over her glass. She grabbed the scarf hanging from my purse to wipe it up, that scarf. The one I'd kept all these years. She used it like any other cloth, completely unaware. I froze. That scarf had been tied to my son's backpack the morning he left for school. The last time I saw him. His birthday. I didn't say anything, just folded it carefully and placed it back in my bag. Sometimes you don't need revenge. You just need the truth to finally breathe. Outside, the rain had eased into a drizzle. We walked back to the store slowly. My mind raced quietly, sorting through decades of lies. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "If you want answers, stop looking in the past. Start with your own son." I stopped walking. My skin turned to ice under the neon diner sign. For 16 years, I thought the past was buried. Turns out, it still had my name on it. The next day started quietly, too quietly. Just after lunch, while I was restocking the memoir section, a delivery man walked in holding a plain cardboard box. No return address, just a name written in smudged black ink across the top. Lenora Caldwell. I felt the air leave my chest. My pen hovered over the signature line as I stared at that name. I signed anyway, fingers numb, and carried the box to the counter like it might explode. Keziah looked up from behind the register, her expression unreadable. It was the same look she wore the first time she'd asked if I was okay. I brought the box into the back room, set it on the table, and opened the flaps with a letter opener. Inside, beneath layers of old tissue paper, were items that didn't belong to me, but somehow did. A bundle of photo envelopes. A worn cassette tape. A single key, no tag. Nothing about the contents said, accident. Someone meant for this to land in my hands. If you dig long enough, I muttered, the ground grows thin under your feet. That's when I knew, I couldn't just wonder anymore. I couldn't let someone else write the ending to this. I brewed 2 glasses of iced tea and walked to the front porch where the sun was starting to lean into late afternoon. Keziah joined me, wiping her hands on her jeans before sitting. I placed the box between us. It was addressed to your mother, I said. But it came here. Her eyes widened the moment she saw the name. How did you get these? She asked, barely above a whisper. I didn't, I said. They found me. She reached inside slowly, pulled out one of the photo envelopes and opened it. Her hands started to shake. My mom left everything. Unpaid rent, storage units full of junk. This looks like stuff from one of them. I remember this one file, yellow, torn, something about a missing boy. Hawthorne case. 2009. I felt a pressure in my chest. Hawthorne was where Garrett's nephew, my son, disappeared. I leaned back in my chair and stared out at the street. For years I told myself the system failed us. That maybe he ran away. That maybe he was taken and lost to the wind. But now the edges of the story were curling upward. Someone had tucked truth between pages and shoved it out of reach. Keziah pulled out the cassette tape. It was in her stuff, she said. I couldn't listen. I didn't want to. I took it from her and led her into the back office where an old tape recorder sat on the shelf. I hadn't used it in years. When the tape clicked in, the crackle came first. Then her voice. Lenora. He was ours to save, but you wouldn't let me try. I stopped breathing. I did what I had to, she continued. She made me the villain. She always did. But I loved that boy. More than she'll ever admit. My name was on her tongue. Places I hadn't spoken of in years spilled out. Things I said in private now exposed in her voice, warped by her version of truth. The recorder slipped from my hand and hit the desk with a dull thud. Keziah stood in the doorway, arms crossed. I recorded it, she said quietly. She left it playing one night while ranting. I never listened until today. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sky was smeared with orange and gray. Dust swirled across the display window. I picked up the tape again and stared at it like it had teeth. We didn't say much after that. Just moved. I asked Keziah to place the tape and the photos in the private office, the one Garrett used to call closed for inventory, whenever something felt too heavy to explain. I locked the door behind us. I walked back to the counter, retrieved the plum scarf, folded it once, then again, and tucked it carefully into my satchel. It wasn't just fabric anymore. It was a quiet marker. A flag I'd carry into battle, stitched with memory. We're going public, I told her. 1 week. Anniversary of his disappearance. She didn't flinch, just nodded, lips pressed together. I looked at her then and realized something had changed. I was no longer the grieving mother who kept quiet. I was the architect of whatever came next. That night, after the lights were out and the bookstore settled into its creaky hush, my phone buzzed from the kitchen table. Unknown number. Stop digging, or you'll regret the truth you find. The lights flickered once, then again. I didn't move, just stared into the silence, heart steady. Because the storm I summoned is long overdue. I woke up before the sun, my body aching like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. That message still sat heavy in my mind, short, cold, and calculated. Stop digging, or you'll regret the truth you find. I didn't know the number, but I knew the fear it was trying to plant. I got dressed slowly, my fingers fumbling with buttons, my mind elsewhere. At the bookstore, I unlocked the door even though the alarm had been set all night. Nothing looked out of place. But it felt wrong, like someone had moved through my space when I wasn't looking. Keziah arrived not long after. Earlier than usual. She didn't say hello, just stood there, red-eyed, like she hadn't slept either. I got a message too, she finally said. Didn't want to worry you. We sat together at the checkout counter, the silence between us tighter than any conversation could have been. They don't want us talking, I said. They want us scared, she replied. The morning passed in slow, strained minutes. I kept thinking about that message, about who sent it and why now. Sometimes the past isn't behind you, I muttered, more to myself than her. Sometimes it's hiding in your inbox. Around noon, I left for the counseling center. Monica had called it a healing conversation. I knew better. Garrett would be there, she said, and someone neutral to guide us. The room was tidy, bland, neutral paint, neutral lighting, neutral everything. Monica sat like she was posing for a photo shoot. Garrett slumped next to her, silent. The counselor smiled like he had a quota to meet. Monica spoke first. Thank you for coming, Lila. We just want peace. For Keziah. For all of us. I nodded, waiting. You've been putting things in her head. Stories. Accusations. I've told her the truth. She's young, Monica said, like I'd forgotten. You're confusing her. Dragging ghosts out to dance. Garrett didn't even glance at me. The counselor leaned forward. Sometimes healing starts by releasing the past. I smiled, bitter. How do you release something that was never buried properly? Nobody had an answer. Monica stood to grab her purse. That's when it happened. An envelope slid out and landed near my feet. I knew that envelope. I picked it up without asking. Where did you get this? She froze. Garrett answered. We found it. In the old storage box. That box was in my office. Locked. You were becoming unstable, he said quietly. We had to control the narrative. By stealing from me? He didn't flinch. By protecting the family. That word again. Protect. Control. Silence. I left. I sat in my car, gripping the wheel, then pounding it. I screamed. Not words, just sound. A raw, guttural sound that came from someplace deeper than pain. Images flashed. Garrett as a child, then as a man. Lying. Smiling. Deflecting. Have I been silent too long? I asked the rearview mirror. Is kindness just another word for giving up? The scarf lay beside me. I grabbed it, not for warmth, but for clarity. If telling the truth was going to cost me peace, so be it. I wasn't going to live in their version of reality anymore. Back at the store, I found Keziah waiting with a brown package. No sender. It's for you, she said, eyes wary. Inside was a flash drive and a note. Play this before someone else does. I held it in my hand, feeling its weight, its silence. This wasn't just about a missing boy. This was about silencing every woman who dared to ask why. The bell above the door had long stopped ringing. The store lay silent except for the rain drumming against the windows. I pulled the scarf from my satchel and placed it neatly on the desk, drift plumb, quiet witness to everything. Keziah stood beside me, 2 cups of coffee in her hands, her face set and determined. I told her tonight we acted. No more waiting. She nodded. The calm air around us trembled with what was coming next. Betrayals I'd swallowed for years began to crowd the small space with heat. My sanctuary felt invaded, but that was okay. It was time for the storm to find its voice. We shut the front room lights and moved into my back office, the one they always told me was for storage only. I locked the door behind us and placed 1 coffee on the file cabinet. I asked Keziah quietly, "Do you believe your mom ever asked for help instead of running away?" She stared back at me for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. On the screen, August 2009, Mom's plea. I pressed play. Lenora's voice came through, quiet, frightened. She said, "I can't keep doing this alone. They won't let us speak." My chest locked. That was the missing link. The unspoken cry. I leaned back, bitterness rising like acid. I wasn't the only one kept quiet, was I? Next I used the key I found, walked into the archive room. The door creaked and I shone my phone's light past dusty shelves and stacked boxes. There were labels, 1978 to 2012 Blythe Archive, Delaney Family Files. I opened a folder marked 2009. In it, legal papers transferring ownership of this store from Azalea to Garrett and Odessa, signed in lieu of father's consent. My son's name, was nowhere in the documents. I read aloud. Whereas the undersigned hereby relinquishes all claims. I felt the shift inside me, from victim to investigator. I collected copies, photos. I placed them in an envelope and wrote, Truth Box 2026. For the first time, I held the ammunition. They wore the guilt. I turned back to Keziah. Tomorrow we release this, to the press, to every customer, to the people who trusted this store. I told her the story we hide from becomes the story that hides us. I drafted an email to Felicity Sanger, the journalist I'd met once. I rehearsed what I would say in public, calm voice, only facts. I asked not for pity, but for recognition. I wrapped the scarf around my neck. This time it wasn't waiting, it was armor. My pain had a purpose now. At midnight, the phone rang. I answered. A deep voice said, "You opened a door you can't close." My heartbeat sped. The war had begun. I stood in the dark office, the lights off, documents in my hand. The scarf felt heavier than ever. My silence had turned loud. I locked the door to the bookstore as dusk settled in, the street lamp outside casting a pale glow across the display window. The files were laid out on the desk, each one a piece of the story I'd hidden for years. I took a slow breath and remembered the phrase I wrote on that envelope. The story we hide from becomes the story that hides us. Keziah arrived moments later, 2 sets of typed statements clutched in her hand, one marked, media, the other, legal counsel. Her face was tense, but her eyes had resolve. I wrapped the plum scarf around my neck, the fabric a silent nod to all the patience and quiet I'd practiced. Then I told her, tonight we go from waiting to acting. The stillness around us felt heavy with what was coming, but underneath it there was a pulse, quiet, rising. The next morning I walked into the local news studio, past the security desk and into the green room with the journalist Felicity Sanger by my side. The cameras clicked, lights warmed, monitors glowed. To me it felt like stepping into another version of myself. When I sat in the anchor's chair I made sure my voice was steady. On live air I said, for 16 years I've watched silence win. Tonight I choose voice. Behind me the screen flipped through the documents, ownership transfers, the missing boy case file, the audio recording of Lenora's voice. The audience reacted. I saw the shift in their eyes. In the control room, Garrett's expression tightened. State of shock, embarrassment, power slipping. When the credits rolled I felt something change. The microphone wasn't just in front of me, it was mine. Not just borrowed. I left the studio, heart pounding, exhilaration mixed with vulnerability. I'd stepped out of the shadows. Later that evening the bookstore was quiet again, but everything had changed. My phone buzzed. The news studio's account had just posted a clip of me confessing wrongdoing, a manipulated video framed to make me look unstable. My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. I flipped on the live stream from my phone and addressed my audience directly. They just tried to silence me again. Gladly, I rhyme with resilience. I looked at Keziah standing beside me in the back room, her face catching the light from the screen. She nodded once, solid, unwavering. I realized Garrett and Odessa had preempted me. They were striking back with force. But I refused to stagger. I turned the attack into exposure. Live now. Transparent. Their move revealed their fear. In that moment fear transformed into clarity. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone. The next morning, I announced we'd hold an open event at the bookstore, inviting longtime customers, local press, community members. Transparency is strategy. I called Maud Allerton, assured her the store's legacy was safe. Her voice trembled, and I heard why I was fighting, not just for me, but for the people who cared. I drafted an email to the regional publishing board, outlining the ownership transfer practices exposed by our findings. I sat at the desk, scarf around my neck, and thought. They thought they held the script. I'm rewriting the ending. Calm, determined. The movement had begun. As midnight struck the lights flickered. A gust of wind swept through the open door before it locked behind him. Garrett stood there in moonlight, tall and silent. You know this ends one way, Lila, he said. I leaned on the counter, met his gaze without fear. The power had shifted. I didn't need to ask questions. I only needed to answer. I arrived at the bookstore early, while the sky still had daylight in it, but dusk pulling in fast. I arranged the chairs and refreshed the coffee carafe, greeting the few regulars who wandered in with polite nods, but inside I felt like a commander preparing her battalion. I placed the envelope labeled Truth Box 2026 on the display counter behind the register, documents showing, visible but discreet. Keziah helped me adjust the lighting in the reading area. I caught my reflection in a mirror and said aloud to myself, tonight isn't about blame, it's about what we owe each other. I pulled on the plum scarf, the one I'd kept folded so many years, It was a signal now, not just a memory. Garrett and Odessa arrived as invited guests. Their polite smiles didn't fool me. They thought they'd seen every move. Fine, let's give them the script they never saw. The room hummed with quiet tension, the kind that promises impact. The Q&A began with a trickle of questions from the audience, longtime customers, neighbors, a few local press. I stood behind the counter with the documents neatly laid out in front of me. When I revealed the legal files showing the ownership transfer from Azalea to Garrett and Odessa in 2009, the room shifted. I said, "This building stood on my husband's dream." I didn't walk away, someone moved that dream off the shelf. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Garrett's face drained color. Odessa shifted in her seat like her tailor forgot the alterations. A veteran customer, Silas Keller, raised his hand and asked, "Why wasn't this public knowledge all these years?" I answered plainly. The silence grew. This was public validation, the first real blow landed. I saw gratitude and anger mix in the room, my truth becoming their truth. Mid-speech, my phone buzzed. A live feed of the event appeared on screen, then flickered. Suddenly the projection behind me changed. A manipulated clip of me admitting wrongdoing, one I never made. My heart raced. Their move was preemptive. Garrett and Odessa trying to turn the tables. I stopped talking, looked into the camera facing the room. They're showing you what they made me do. Here's what I actually said. I pressed play on Lenora's tape, her voice trembling. I can't keep doing this alone. They won't let us speak. The live stream shot up in views and comments. The audience stared. Their power cracked in real time. I stood firm and said, "No more edits. No more silences." Keziah stood beside me, small but unwavering. We weren't just victims anymore. We were the narrative. After the event, I walked to the back of the store where Keziah handed me a folded letter. I unfolded it slowly. Lenora's handwriting. "If I die and you find this, please know I lied so you could live." My breath caught. The sacrifice hit me. I stepped toward the glass door, looked at Garrett's reflection as he turned to leave quietly. I said softly, but with power, "You don't get to keep rewriting history while I keep building it." My voice echoed in the quiet night. The masks fell off them tonight. Mine came off too. Exposure is no longer a threat, it's the path forward. As the store emptied, I stepped outside into the cool night air. I held the plum scarf in my hands. The scarf waited. So did I. In the parking lot a police cruiser pulled up. Keziah tensed beside me. The weight of what comes next settled in. This wasn't just a resolution. This was the beginning of what I was owed. Morning light streamed through the windows of the bookstore, landing on scattered papers and empty chairs from last night's event. I sat at the counter with a cup of coffee cooling beside me, untouched. The city woke quietly beyond the glass, cars humbling and soft. Then Keziah arrived, a folded newspaper in her hand. The headline, "Bookstore Truth Sparks Community Reckoning." My hands trembled, but not from fear, this time it was a release. I felt seen, after all those years of silence. I whispered, "Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just exhales." By afternoon the news broke. Local authorities confirmed the ownership documents were forged. I got a call from Felicity Sanger. "They're arresting him this afternoon." Garrett's name surfaced in the old case files tied to the missing boy. I sat in the quiet office of the bookstore, letting the weight of it settle. Vindication felt odd, tangled with sorrow. He had once been family. I said softly, "Winning doesn't taste like I imagined. It tastes like ashes and freedom mixed together." Later I joined Keziah at the Lakeside Memorial Park where the boy's name was inscribed on a plaque years ago. I tied the plum scarf around the metal edge, a final echo of every silent year I survived. A small crowd gathered, leaving flowers, letters, old photos. Keziah read aloud Lenora's letter. "If truth costs us love, then we bought something priceless." I put the scarf down gently, then thought, maybe forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's learning to remember without bleeding. Weeks passed. The bookstore changed. Community volunteers restored the reading room. Regulars came back. Keziah became assistant manager, her laugh was stronger now. I hung a framed quote above the counter. "Silence is not peace." People came not for gossip, but for stories that heal. I said in a quiet moment. For 16 years, I thought survival meant hiding. Now I know, it means telling the truth and still daring to smile. One evening as I closed the shop, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Handwriting unfamiliar. Inside was a photo of a teenage boy holding a book with our store's name on it. The note read, "He made it out. He wanted you to know." Tears came, soft, not grief but release. I switched off the lights, held the photo, and whispered, "Then it was worth every silence."